Thank you so much. So now we are back to the plenary. I hope you had a fun with this nice exercise. And I'm introducing group one. And Alison Clausen, please report to the outcomes of your breakout session.
Arno, can you make it a little bit bigger?
Okay, it was very rapid. It felt the good session, but it went very, very quickly. So hopefully we've still managed to capture some things that are useful here. I've tried to organize it a little bit, but I'll do a better job of that afterwards. Essentially, I'll come back to those first 2 points at the end, in fact. But I think some of we were looking at really at opportunities that the Ocean Decade can bring. First of all, it was seen very much as a great opportunity to have a more transparent ecosystem, with the transparency really reducing user confusion, user fatigue. We're going to start losing users if we don't make accessing data easy, and if they don't see the benefits of using data. And so it was felt that this was one thing that the decade could really contribute to. We talked a lot about industry data and accessibility and confidentiality of industry data. There seems to be more willingness on the part of many industry stakeholders to share data more than they did 10 years ago. And we're seeing examples of industry actually approaching data managers to ask how they can share data. There's still a need to overcome commercial confidentiality, but there's starting to be some good analysis of barriers, of incentives, of obstacles, things around risk perception, ownership of data, etc. And it was felt that the decade could help share some of these examples of not only the barriers and incentives, but also the measures that we use to overcome them. There was a discussion around the fact that it's a complex world, and we need to be aware of that. And it may be better to target some form of accessibility rather than trying to have everything absolutely accessible straight away, but really to focus on the priority data needs for sustainable development, particularly in the early years, and that this can evolve, because not only will that help data providers be more comfortable with providing data and how it's going to be used and what the benefit to them is, which is very important, but also will not flood data users with massive amounts of data. There was a very strong feeling that we need to depend strongly on the national level as a key opportunity. Find champions, work with what countries are already doing. Sweden was really cited as an example here that is already starting to work on this. And then make use of good examples. And the iAtlantic program, with its very diverse membership and data management plan and approach to data, was really cited as a case study, for example, that you need to show people the path, you need to show people the way, and having good case studies is a way to do that. And then at the end, I asked the group, is it realistic what the Ocean Decade is trying to achieve in terms of data management? Everyone agrees that it's a nice idea, but is it realistic? And the answer was very clear. Even if it's not, we have no choice. It's now or never, and we have to make this work. And the community has to come together to do that. If we can just go back up to the top. There were two points that I didn't quite get to fit into the other points, but I really wanted to bring them up. Opportunities through the decade to leverage industry cruises to increase sharing with academic researchers and other stakeholders. I think that's very important, and certainly something, from the decade team we'd love to see happening. And then how can the decade help with data usage licenses in terms of making sure that the licensing is right in the use of the data, and this is something that needs to be addressed. So thank you to all the working group members. It was a really quick but very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much, Alison. Now I would like to give the floor to Hernan Garcia, group number 2.
Okay, thank you so much. We had a lovely discussion. We came up with a few ideas. I think that some of the ideas were that we do not need to develop new infrastructure, but partner with existing ones, try to leverage what exists rather than to create a new one. It is a challenging structure. We need to develop open access to data and ontologies, and how to access and use this information is critical. To bring about results, we need funding, not only from states, but private and so on and so forth, and commitment to realize these opportunities. I think an important point that a lot of people in our group identified as is that we need to put concrete questions on information gaps to realize opportunities to catalyze the UN decade. That is, what do we do with the data? How to inform change? We also need to work on how and who is using the data to build a better observance system. Exploit opportunities to harmonize data and information. We need to generate a system that enables developers across industries, public and private, to operate and build a more useful system to convert data into useful knowledge. Opportunities will come about when we identify information gap. That was a central theme in our discussions. I think we have a lot of opportunities, but we need to put more concrete and specific questions so that we can align data and information together. And lastly, we talked about capacity development to providing funds for and mechanisms to pool funds. We need to develop a business model and how to harmonize all these funding requirements for the capacity development that we need. And I will leave it at that. And I want to thank our group, which was wonderful.
Thank you, Hernan. Thank you so much. And now we are moving to the report of the Group 3, Julian Barbier.
Thank you, Sergey, and again, thank you to our group. We only started to really get excited, and it's a shame. I mean, we could have probably spent another hour, if not two. Anyway, the question was really focusing on challenges to effective collaboration around data. So one of the first findings is that, of course, one of the issues that there are many common methods and best practices around data, which makes this issue of interoperability and common standards difficult. So there was a feeling that there's a need to create trust, and in order to create trust amongst the different data providers and users, we really need to start this discussion at the global level in order to ensure a good level of acceptability. So in a way, I think the decade can offer that kind of framework for starting those discussions. There's of course the recognition that there are very diverse type of data that we're talking about here, which are even have their own ecosystems of infrastructures and networks, and that in a way, we need to find a driver for changing the practice and for really building this interoperability. And that, in a sense, really requires having a more effective dialogue between data providers and data users, particularly when we're talking about the engagement of decision makers and users in industry, which is also, I think, something that we've been talking about in the context of a decade in terms of co-design. One of the challenge, of course, is that data, when it comes to the research community, is very often seen as a kind of a currency for the researchers to really advance their career. So that might be one of the reasons sometimes the data is not always coming forward and is staying in local database or report. So this is a real impediment to data sharing that I think we need to address, and we need to find some kind of incentives to break that challenge. We talked a little bit about good examples in terms of developing data services that really respond to the needs of local end users. Examples of the GMAS in Africa, which is probably helping local fishermen I think in the Gulf of Guinea in particular. But also we have examples with the tsunami warning systems community and developing important information in local languages. So for this, again, having a global enabling framework is very important. There is a work of organizations like GEO, for example, which could really inspire us, particularly the work that they're doing in land-based monitoring. Another important comment is that we feel that there's a need to find some kind of boundaries to this whole discussion and to really get some kind of convergence in terms of what it is that we are asking people to collect in terms of data and to exchange because this could be a very endless conversation. So for that, of course, this could be driven by what global monitoring systems are collecting, and of course, those monitoring systems themselves need to respond to end user needs and societal services. But for example, there is an emerging needs for biological data, and we see this in many programs and networks who are working on those issues. But again, a lack of harmonization, and that's really becoming an issue. Can the SDGs be a driver to try to harmonize the approach around data collection? There are, as you may know, in SDG 14, several dimensions, including one focusing on ocean acidification, another one focusing on marine ecosystems, as well as one on capacity development and research. Some of those parameters and data are being harmonized and collected through a common methodology, but that's probably not enough. And we need more, particularly looking at ecosystem functioning, for example, or cumulative stresses. So again, there's a need to try maybe not to share everything, but to focus on a core subset of what needs to be collected and shared. The challenge of integration of data is, of course, a major issue, and that requires really, I think, having again a common framework and being probably a bit more prescriptive. We talked finally about the issue of unpublished data, which is sitting in local databases or local science reports. Again, they might be incentives for really stimulating the contribution in terms of populating specific indicators or information products, and recognizing the contribution of the providers without necessarily making the data fully available, if this is sometimes one of the issues that is underpinning the lack of exchange. So I think that's all we got to. Again, thank you very much to the group, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. And now I will give a very short report about the group 4. I was not very good in making a long statements, but I was trying to catch up the key words or key phrases. You see the outlined, the ones that have been repeated several times throughout the discussion. So first issue raised, the challenge was raised that we need to make sure that we have a data stewards, not at the functions, but also as a job positions. And it's multiplied that we will have a limited time for the implementing the decade. So we make sure that the data stewards are the long-term positions. There are also new capacities are needed. We also need to make sure that we will change the behavior of the science, and also the guidance is needed on how to make data available. This comes in correspondence that we need a data sharing culture. So this kind of statement has been was raised several times. And I will jump into another bullet that it should come from the student level. So we have discussion that there is a lack of education at student level. There should be some kind of course for basic data skills and any education program. Also more comprehensive on finding data and reusing the data. We need also to define the data we want to share, starting from the categories, but also identifying the resolution issue. So we need to identify for specific communities what kind of data and what kind of resolution for the data is needed. There was a nice slogan, open data, open system, so everyone can go and access, but everyone can contribute. So this kind of openness and is not giving an inclusiveness. Yes, and thanks, Taco, not just can, but built upon, should and must build. Thank you so much. We can use existing standards that can facilitate to make sure that we will have more open data. We can start from the EOB-based approach, but it's a bottom-up. But from the top-down approach, we need to speak with the science group and the decision makers in order to make sure we understand what data is needed. There was a statement that data sharing should be accredited, and this can correspond to what has been said by Julian in order to open those treasuries. We still have difficulties for finding the data need for the users, so we need to more introduce existing systems, because we understand for the specific purposes, the Google-like system is not enough. I will skip this one. And finally, we agree that there should be a mature level of metadata and vocabularies underneath, and the wider use as best practices. And thanks to the group, it was a great conversation. And I'm sorry that it was in a virtual and we had no chance to have a drink afterwards. I'm sorry, my mic was off. Group 5 and Ariel Chorshi, please.
Yep, thank you very much, Sergey. And I would like to thank, in particular, to those who joined this special breakup group. It was some sort of a speed dating, you know, and in a very short time we tried to cover quite a complex question. I have rearranged some of the ideas that came up, but one thing was that all the participants recognize that they have a wide range of users of ocean relevant data, and that we pointed out in the group some of the words that, for example, Vladimir Ryabinin said in the opening, where we have oceanographic data and ocean relevant data, and within the framework and under the umbrella of the decade, we have both, and we always say we integrate the natural sciences with social sciences and the communities, etc. So that was reflected in this wide range of users of ocean relevant data. Of course, some participants mentioned that they have large-scale, multidisciplinary regional data projects with many user groups. And across these groups, quality assurance, indicators of level of validation, versioning, provenance of the data, and up-to-date metadata are concerns across all stakeholders, and that was considered a very important factor here. And the decade could promote and raise awareness on the need and use of such indicators, probably the standardization, to support data reuse with confidence across stakeholder groups. The decade can also promote the integration of quality control data, which depends on improved communications of quality control, quality assessment, assessed metadata. The use of indicators and from economical, social, ecological indicators targeted to policymakers was considered important as a contribution to the wider use of the data and information and for services to end users. The decade will make this data more known to the ocean community at large, as this data isn't typically produced by the ocean community. So we're going back to this whole idea of integrating different disciplines and dimensions. Some participants mentioned that the cases where data licensing is sometimes restricted, and this data is required for key reports, for example, state of the environment, and they're not always available to all end users that can or should use it. So we need to understand the challenges derived from information not always available. Of course, it was thought that perhaps the decade can help through, and alternatives could be facilitating agreements or memorandum of understandings, but perhaps this could not be the most effective or scalable way to address the issue. It was mentioned that as a minimal requirement, the signature of bilateral or multilateral agreements could be a possible way forward. Merging oceanographic and environmental data with socioeconomic data will help promote more usage. And that is, for example, by nesting in other data flows to gain momentum. And it's part of the synergy that has been discussed in plenary in this meeting. The decade, it was considered, offers the opportunity to give visibility to existing databases of research infrastructures, promote their enhancements in an open and collaborative effort, and including marine research infrastructure operators, scientists, engineers, policymakers, private companies, and academia. The decades, in a sense, offers an opportunity to make reporting on the essential ocean variables more transparent and standardized, socializing the work of the Global Ocean Observing System panels. When thinking about how to increase the collaboration and make the data and information available and more useful to end users, it was mentioned that we need also to consider traditional knowledge groups and, of course, citizen science as end users, and they can also be potential data providers, keeping consideration of the different types of sources and quality assurances of the different types of data each group would be collecting. Of course, other potential end users would be fisheries managers, commercial and private fishers. All in all, we are talking about all stakeholders engaged in ocean matters. It was mentioned that communication and outreach is needed to get data and metadata out to potential users and establishing trust. Unblocking data access in collaboration, translating policy and decision into action was also considered very important. And the concept behind this line was that the high-level concepts and calls need practical implementation and standards of compliance to facilitate local policy development that it's meaningful in a practical sense. And with that, Sergey, finish the overall report of this breakout group. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ariel. And now finally, Group 6 and Lucy Scott, please.
Thank you very much. So Group 6, we also addressed the existing and potential end user groups. And thank you to those who joined this breakout group. Your contributions were really appreciated. There was active discussion. We could have gone on for much longer. Just in very brief feedback then, with regards to the existing user groups, we had a wide range of users. Some examples were given from the different members of the breakout group, and they've been listed in the document. Potential user groups that are looked at in future were quite interesting. We looked at some suggestions that were made were to engage park and MPA managers to convey the importance of their impact on natural resources, looking at potential user groups bring in the private sector, some organizations moving from a regional focus such as EU to more global visibility. Then with regards to recommendations, we had a series of recommendations. Some of these are that through the decade, collaboration can increase visibility and reach. Visualization tools are important for the scientific community. An example was given that data delivery must be in a usable, synthesized, useful form. We had an example that organization focused on getting in-situ data in from vessels and observation networks, etc. We're focusing on products that society needs. A point was raised that end users can be at any point along the data development chain. So end users can be using raw data, intermediate data products, or final products, and this must be kept in mind. Many users don't have any use for the raw data, but there is a big demand for useful products. Quality control is a critical step, and there are many players at different steps along the chain. Not only data themselves, but also there are other players and definitions that need to be considered. Scripts and algorithms, etc., make up data tools and methods. These must also be managed, so the environment is very complex. There's also not an easy and common understanding of the definitions of data. Users must be involved early on to ensure fit-for-purpose products. And the connection to society and the broader public is important. Ocean literacy and backing for politicians to take necessary measures. So also to keep in mind citizen engagement and the wide range of stakeholders that can be data users. Technologies from the gaming industry and role-playing games and tools for potential scenarios are very useful tools. And sharing products is important, but it is still critical to share raw data in this ecosystem so that other users can incorporate the raw data into their own products And here we had an important point of improve, test, and validate products. One must consider there was a discussion of incentives for data sharing and how these can be leveraged. So what are the incentives to data contributors to share data in a usable way? There could be a commitment to only developing tools based on open data to facilitate reproducibility, but there are also other approaches to encourage users to open data, and we need to consider what these are. For data to be usable for as many stakeholders as possible, capacity development will be important. And we also need to understand and apply data and information for conservation and sustainable development and how to do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. In order to summarize agenda item 4, I would like to inform the meeting that we will consolidate all the outcomes of all of the 6 breakout groups into the report of the meetings, of that meeting. And I would like also to say that it was very interesting exercise in order that we had 2 groups dealing with the same question and producing different perspectives in order with the area of expertise and knowledge and understanding. And thank you so much for your participation, active participation in breakout groups. And now I'm giving the floor to Peter.